Hello and welcome back, my partners in crime. Welcome back to a new case, a new true crime. Now this is a 2020 case, and before I say anything else, I'm just going to say to you there is a serious warning out with this. This is adult only. This is about a paedophile spanning 4 countries. He's abused over 50 children. So there is a serious warning that goes out with this case. This is explicit, and you know, it could trigger something. So really, if this case is not for you, there's plenty of more, both on Murder Analysed and on Let's Have a Chat About Murder, that you can listen to or watch. So please take this warning before we do anything else. Listen, I have to say, don't I, before I start, because everyone, you know, keeps telling me I have to say, you know, can you hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell and stuff, and I appreciate you for doing that. I really do. I also appreciate all the comments I get and the emails I get and the letters I get sent, you know, because we put the new PO box up there now for people to write, and they've really found that a good way to correspond with me. Not everyone uses email, not everyone likes to use email, so I really appreciate all the communication we have between us, and I'm really honoured that you are subscribing to my channel and that you are finding the cases interesting. Now, as I've said with this case is a shocking case. It is a case of this Boris. Now, as you know, I'm no good with accents or this sort of thing. So I think it's Boris Kunsevitsky. I think that's what his name is, right? It's Boris, and that's all I'm going to use through the rest of this case, but it's up there and it'll be in all the notes and you can see it. Now, this man was 53 at the time of his arrest, and this is a case from Melbourne, Victoria in Australia, and it was, I think this man was arrested and charged and actually sentenced in 2020, but he abused over 47 boys in 4 different countries. So there's lots of laws in this, and as I spoke in other cases when we've dealt with paedophiles that are not on the turf of where they've actually done the crime at the time what they've been caught, you either have to wait for them to return. This man was working at the time in Singapore, so they had to wait for him to return to Australian soil before they could arrest him, and that's when all the evidence then started coming out, because he was shipping stuff back from Singapore to Australia, and this is where a lot of this data and imaging and stuff was found. And this is then when this case blew up. They knew this man was dangerous, this task force, and I think they worked with the German task force as well. And so there was a lots of issues here that go on when you are trying to convict someone and find evidence about multiple abuse of children for a span of about 15 years, really, to put this case together. And they have said actually in Australia it's probably one of the worst paedophiles that they've ever seen in Australia. Now, all these children that we're going to mention in this, and I think there's around 50 actually, that they know of. That means there's plenty more that they don't. And as we go through in the different countries that he abused these children in, you can understand why they can't find all of his victims. They've got photographs and they've got images and they've got, you know, videos and different stuff of abuse, but of course they can't find all the victims in this case. So there is multiple victims in this case. Now, he produced more than 35,000 photographs, 4,800 videos in Southeast Asia, and he was jailed for 35 years. So we're going to get that out of the way now, and he has a minimum of 28 years to serve in prison before he can be released, you know, under any bail conditions at all. Now, 28 years to serve in an Australian prison for the offences that this man's done, you know, well, good luck to him in that one. But anyway, he was described, right, as this by this judge that finally got him into the court as a superior intelligent man with a paedophilic disorder, and shown no remorse at all for what he'd done. And this is Justice Champion said this about him, and I want to tell you a little bit more about him before we go into the real facts of this case, because it's important that you understand what sort of a man this man was before we go into his crimes. Justice Champion also stated, and he stressed this, that this twisted beliefs of this man was clearly and utterly denounced and as completely unacceptable in the civilised society. Now we're talking about here a paedophile who is so dangerous to children. He was prolific in what he did. There would have been no stopping this man. And because he went to certain countries, and we'll go through the countries in a minute, it made it easier for him to do what he was doing. Really. And so and I keep saying, these people who run these task forces and has to go through all this stuff online and everywhere else, because this man did put stuff online as well. It's an important job to do, isn't it? Because without these people, doing this sort of job, looking through this awful, sometimes the most, terrible stuff that's being done to children, these people would never be brought to justice. So, a credit in all these cases where there are these task forces are involved, and it's multiple task forces that are involved, it's really important that we, give them some respect, really, because without them, this man would still be doing what he's doing, and this man has ruined so many children's lives. You just wouldn't believe it, what this man has done. Anyway, let's get on with this case. So I think this man's charges that he pleaded guilty actually to 59 sexual offences involving 43 children who were victims, as well as child pornography. I don't think he was done for the pornography. I think they just done him for the abuse. They should have actually thrown the book at this man, I believe, but I think really what they wanted is just to get this man off the street as quickly as possible, and didn't want any chance of appeals or anything, because the distribution of that wouldn't have given much more of a sentence on what he already had. So, and it was breathtaking. The scale includes the number of occasions that the offender occurred, and the nature, the variation, the degree of repetition of the type of offending, the number of victims that this man had, in the number of countries that he offended in over this 15-year span. He really was prolific in what he done. A shocking man. As you see photos of him, really, this intelligent man. I think he worked for a company in Singapore to do with anaesthesia and that sort of stuff. An intelligent man. But as I said to you all the time, anybody, anywhere can be a paedophile, right? So in his job, they didn't know anything. People didn't realise anything. He actually was married as well. They didn't realise anything. So, it really, has to hit home with these sort of cases that it could be anyone. And in the end, these people are getting caught. And as they're getting caught, their crimes are being shown to be some of the worst in the world, really. This man needed to be stopped, and thank God for this Australian Federal Police and the German authorities that really pushed and pushed and pushed to get this man however they could. And to have to wait, knowing what this man was doing overseas, and having to wait for him to step back on Australian soil to arrest him. It must have been really awful for this task force and these other authorities that were trying to get this man away from children. It must have been awful for them, that wait, but in the end they got him. The Justice Champion also said, and he was a Supreme Court, actually this was a Supreme Court decision in Victoria. Now he said that his appetite for sexual activity and underpinned his offending appeared to be unsustainable. The more he was doing, the more he wanted to do. There would have been more children, more victims constantly coming from this man because they couldn't stop him. I don't think at that point he could have stopped himself. Whether he wanted to, probably not, but he had no intention of stopping. It was actually, getting worse as time was going on. Maybe he thought that he may get caught one day, and was trying to do as much as he could, because this is sort of how it reads about this man. He was so prolific in what he was doing that it was unsustainable. Really, these children were coming and coming and coming, and he was abusing more and more and more. And if he wasn't abusing them, he was filming them to abuse each other. Sickening man, this man is sick. The Justice Campbell also stated this is probably one of the worst levels and type of such offending that he had ever seen. It was also shocking, and the judge added when he had sentenced him, that he sentenced him to 35 years together, or altogether, because there was multiple charges, we'll go through them now, included 28 years without parole. Listen, I don't know whether this man will make parole, and even if he did, you know, he's now been diagnosed with this, you know, paedophilic disorder, and so you could never let this man out, because this man would be totally unsafe if he ever came out of prison at all. Ever come out of prison. He's 53 when he went in, so he's 55 now, 28 years. You know, really, this man isn't going to walk out of this prison, is he? Not really. And you know, let's hope he doesn't, because I don't think at whatever age this man walks out of prison, he is a danger to children across the world. Really, he is. I think in Singapore, his offences in Singapore were of 5 children that they found out about in Singapore, and they would have found these out because of the photographs and the videos that he took of them. So that was the 5 there. In around, I think January 2001, he had sex with a 14-year-old boy at his home in Singapore. He also engaged in various sexual acts with another 14-year-old in 2002. He took pictures of the 2 engaging in sexual activity at his home, amongst other things. So when he wasn't abusing, he was directing them on how to abuse each other, filming it and putting it online. At this time as well, he was even introducing other boys to have sex with other children in his presence, and he took more than 1,000 photographs and videos of sexual acts amongst the children, which he often directed. As I just said, he felt he was a director, because don't forget, as I've said, he's put these online. People make money. These people make money from that on the dark web. They sell on, and this is how bad this man was. So if he wasn't doing the sexual acts himself, he was directing other children to abuse other children for his own self, you know, sexual gratification, but also to film, photograph and put online and sell on the dark web. This is the character of this man. This is just Singapore. So his offences really, and how he produced all these 35,000 photos. And when, you know, it reads a lot, doesn't it? 35,000 photos, right? You've got to think, 35,000 photos of children being abused. You know, it's shocking. And 4,800 videos of 47 boys being abused throughout Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia and Australia between 2002 and 2017. I mean, you know, when you just think of that number and you think of these children and what these children had to suffer, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? What this man did. It's so shocking to me. And as I've gone through this case, it's hard to, you know, write some of this stuff, because it is extensive, because of the continents that he spanned and the amount of data that these, you know, task force had to go through to get this man, and you know, the images and the graphic images and the you know, pain that these children would have been in, and you know, the suffering that would have been caused by this man to these children. It's absolutely unbelievable that anyone, a human person, could do this to another, especially a child. Right? It's so unbelievable, isn't it? But this is really what's happening, isn't it, out there? This is going on every single bloody day, isn't it, really? So let's talk about this man's sentence before we go in to the other sort of countries. So he was sentenced, and it comprised of a term of imprisonment of 2 states, right? So, which was 11 years with non-parole period of 8 years, plus the term of imprisonment in the Commonwealth charges, which was 24 years with non-parole period of 20 years. A spokesman of the Supreme Court said of Australia that state charges refer to the crime committed in Victoria, Australia, while the Commonwealth charges relate to the crimes in the Philippines, Indonesia and Singapore. Now this Boris, now he grew up in Russia, so that's why the bloody pronunciation of the name, and then migrated to Australia with his family at the age of 12. He moved to Singapore in the 2000s, and he was employed by this local firm, Media, or something, which was he was a director selling you know, equipment for an anaesthetist and that sort of thing. And the company previously has told CNN News that CNA that they knew nothing of his crimes. I don't think. Listen, I think if people knew what this man was doing, you know, in a work environment or any other environment, you would have reported him. It was quite clear that this man was, you know, very good at what he did and very good at hiding what he did for very many years, really, because no one seemed, who knew him, to have any idea of what really truly lay beneath this bloody mask. You know, and I always talk about this mask of sanity because it's what we see, isn't it, as the public, and people who knew him would have seen as his friends. It's this outgoing, friendly, intelligent man in a good job, travelling all over the country for work, you know, different parts of the world for work. But, you know, you take that mask off, right, and that underneath is evil. Only them children, right, would have only have ever seen what the true man that lies beneath that mask is. The victims would have only ever seen that. Normal people in the public that he had no interest in, he was playing an act, wasn't he, living a lie, would have never have seen him remove that mask and what truly lies beneath, or else he would have been arrested years ago. So again, another manipulator, someone that fits in with society, someone that controls the narrative about him. But underneath that, there is a terrible, terrible monster inside this man, and it came out and showed itself to them children. That's the only way I can really describe this man, as a bloody monster. Now, as I said about this Boris, when he was in the Philippines, now the Philippines, you know, he went to certain countries, and the justice champion has said this already. He went to certain countries and he abused in certain countries because he felt that it was easy for him to abuse these children in this country, right? So Philippines and Indonesia, they were the easiest ones, and we have many paedophiles, and we've done many cases on paedophiles that go to these countries, pretend to be something they're not, and they go there, you know, specifically to abuse these children, use the images to make money, whether it's for themselves or for others, and share what they've experienced with these children on the dark web, right? Because in that dark web, they're probably, you know, well liked, well known, sending great images for these other perverts, these other paedophiles to download and watch. But, you know, it's just shocking. And the thing is now, I think with the Philippines and Indonesia and all these other countries are clocking on, right? They are working very closely now with different agencies from all over the world to really combat what's really going on in these countries and to stop this. And as I've said before, we have laws in this country, as Australia have laws in their country, that if you commit a crime abroad, you will be charged for that crime once you hit that soil. Right now, he wasn't in Indonesia, he was in Singapore, but they had to wait for him to leave Singapore so that they could arrest him on that soil. They actually then had to wait for his stuff that was being shipped back from Singapore to Australia before they could gain all the evidence they needed to charge this man and put this man away, really, hopefully, for the rest of his life. Now, this Boris, he also abused a boy in Melbourne. This is who they know about, from 2004 to 2005, with German police years later finding 55 images of the abuse in a file labelled jailbait. Now, this boy didn't come forward, right? Because, you know, many don't, and I've said this before, and he was found because of the images that were put out against him in a folder called jailbait. So this man knew that he would go to prison, or jail as he likes to call it, right, because of what he was doing to young children. Just by that label on that folder, jailbait, this man knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew it, and he knew he was going to get caught, right, in the end. But this was 2004. This man actually wasn't caught until 2017. Can you imagine the damage this man had done, really, throughout this time? Shocking, really. So you know, it's really bad when you really think about how many offences this man has committed. So he was never charged with any distributing of any child pornography. As I said before, they had him on so much other stuff. But when he went and pled guilty to 59 offences of including sexual intercourse with a child, producing child photography material while outside Australia. So again, we have these laws now that are, you can produce and do all this stuff out of the country that you are, you know, born in or have residency under, because he wasn't born in Australia, he was actually born in Russia. He did, though, emigrate at the age of 12, and he probably had Australian citizenship to come and go as freely as he done. But that means then that under them laws of Australia, when you are producing images like this, which is an offence, right, to produce these sort of images and also to distribute these sort of images, you will then be charged when you hit that soil, Australian soil again. And that's exactly what they did with this man. Now, Justice Champion, he said, just listen, they have to watch these and see these images, as would the jury, as would other people, and that the jury would have been discretionable, and that would have been down to whether they thought these images were okay to show the jury. They probably wouldn't have seen all of them. They would have had more descriptions than actual visual, you know, because that would, listen, this is not going to leave your memory, right, if you see stuff like this. So in most cases like this, they wouldn't actually see the photography or the images on the video and stuff. It would usually have been described to them, because descriptions you can usually forget a little bit, but I'm telling you, the jury here would have had, you know, what an awful case to sit on, really. So yeah, I think they would have been more likely to have been read the descriptions of the things, but the judge has said that they were so sordid and deeply disturbing even to him, right? So in that statement, no, the jury, I don't think, would have seen any of them images at all, because no court, no defence, no prosecution, right, no matter what side you're on in these trials, want to give someone harm, right? And that's what it would have caused, harm to the jurors to have seen such images. So and plus, you know, it's an offence to show these sort of things, but in a court of law, yes, the judge would have seen him, other people would have seen him, but I don't think the jury would have, because they would never ever have forgot it, right? They would never have forgot it, ever. And none of these pictures or videos or anything should ever have been distributed anyway, anywhere. So I think it would have just been descriptions. He said him also that the child abuser was appalling, proportionate, and he said that an Australian victim went on to develop anxiety, attempted suicide. He ended up in $1,000 of debt because of the subsequent drug habit. He lost his job and his marriage suffered, and he ended up living with his parents. Now, this was taken from the victim, the Australian victim, that was 2004-2005 victim. Now, let's talk about this when we talk about the effects of what happens to these children. This is quite normal, to tell you the truth, right? Their mental health is not right. They don't understand it when they're young. It's you know, a lot of these kids suffer terribly with anxiety and depression after, and the suicide thoughts are there because of what's happened to him. He can't express it, he can't explain it himself, so he holds the guilt even though he's done nothing wrong. Usually the victims hold that guilt because they think they have done something wrong or they haven't told and stuff, so they hold guilt in. They have got nothing to feel guilty about, right? They are a victim. But when you're telling a child, and that child's growing up with this fault inside them, that they know that something's happened to them that's just really bad, and they haven't told, and even if they have told, have they been believed? You know, all this sort of thing. So the debt, clear, sometimes, or most of the time actually, people with mental health, that has been caused from issues in childhood, like abuse of any sort, form, usually do get into debt because it's one way of making themselves feel better, right? They can't usually hold down a job. They can't, they're trying, but the depression and the faults and the reoccurring faults come back. and that feeling of worthlessness that a lot of these victims have, which this is why if we can get victims early enough that you can give them assistance, you know, counselling and all this sort of stuff to help them come through their life and live a normal life where they haven't got these feelings of depression and guilt and suicidal thoughts. But it happens. It's probably one of the biggest things. They can get over the rape, they can get over the abuse in that way, but mentally, no, they can't. The brain takes longer to heal than the body. So this judge said, you know, there's no sentence that he could pass, I suppose, that will undo this tremendous pain that these cause these victims. And he's right. You know, but the thing is, I think with public, and I've said this before about public opinion, why just 28 years before, you know, all right, there's a certain, you know, thresholds and tariffs and stuff that they can use, but are we still not being harsh enough on these paedophiles, on these sex offenders like this that have destroyed so many lives over, you know, a 15-year span, and for over, you know, 47, 50 odd children that we know of that this man has abused and damaged their life forever? What would be enough? Life, really. Never let this man out of jail, because if you do, how can we protect ourselves from this man even in 28 years? Age is not a barrier for a paedophile. It's not. They're not going to stop just because they reach 70 or 80. They just find other ways of doing it. The court documents showed that these children were between the ages of 10 and 17. Most offences were in the Philippines, and he also abused children in Singapore and Indonesia, but the majority were in the Philippines. And I think the 10-year-old to the 17-year-olds remembered that he liked to the older children that he had abused, probably over a few years, and grooming them and doing all this sort of stuff that he was doing, then got the older children to abuse the younger ones, and that's what he was filming. His crimes date back actually to January 2001, and that's when he had sex with a child under the age of 16 in the Philippines. Between September 2002 and August 2003, he had sex with a victim in Singapore, taking 17 photographs of the boy, who was about 12 to 14 years old at the time. This happened in Boris's home. Police also found 28 photographs of another boy, these images dating back to November 2002, when he was living in Singapore, and showed him committing sodomy on the boy and performing oral sex on him. The other victim in Singapore is not mentioned in the court documents. Among the multiple crimes that Boris has maintained a sexual relationship with the boys who were between 13 and 15 at the time in Melbourne between 2004, January the 1st, 2004 and October the 1st, 2005. Between June the 11th, 2010 and June the 16th, 2011, and again between February the 20th, 2013 and June the 11th, 2013, Boris engaged in persistent sexual abuse of 5 children outside Australia. He also introduced these children to have sex with others in his presence. Between May 18, 2010 and April 28, 2015, Boris created more than 1,000 photographs and videos depicting children engaging in sexual activity with each other under his directions, or pictures and films of him sexually abusing these children at the same time. At least on one occasion, he shows these pictures and videos to other children who he also abused, and also distributed his images on the internet. This is a prolific traveller, and in his police interview explained that his travel was extensively for work, and some of his offences, as I've said, occurred in Singapore over this period between 2001 and 2017. As I said, he also travelled extensively to the Philippines and Indonesia, with most of the offending occurrence in Philippines. Often his trips to Asian countries were brief, and the travel dates coincided with the commencement of the offences. So the thing is, what he did when he took the photographs and filmed, it's dated, and so they put the two dates together, really, and that's how they matched up, that as he was doing these even short trips, he was going there to abuse. So how he was arrested, okay? So his crimes went undetected until a victim was identified in 2016 by German police, had found these 55 photos. Remember this, you know, jailbait sort of folder, and the images of this Australian boy who was groomed and abused by Boris. An arrest warrant in Australia was issued, but it could not be executed because he was in Singapore at that time. This is where now all the other laws start kicking in. In May 2017, charges were filed in Australia while he was overseas. Boris was arrested when he landed in Australia on September the 4th, 2017. Police officers found thousands of images and videotapes on a laptop, 2 hard drives showing him sexually abusing children. The laptops and hard drives have been shipped over by Australian authorities from his home in Singapore. Officers found this folder, this named, you know, jailbait folder that he kept, and also within that folder were subfolders that he had. These also were labelled with victims' names and stuff. He liked to remember everything about them. Jailbait, it says, is an informal word for someone who is perceived by some to be sexually attractive but younger than the legal age for sexual consent. Right? Now, the reason that he was allowed to stay in Singapore, because he was an Australian, but he did marry a foreigner, it says, don't know where from, but and he married her in Singapore. So if it's an Australian talking about someone that is not Australian, I think she was from Singapore. And really, I think he took about a year off at that point from offending, and then again about a year to 20 months later he started then abusing boys again after that. You know, we have a lot of paedophiles like this man, as I've said before, that try to fit into society, and being married and having your own children and stuff makes it fit more, doesn't it? Really, you know, acceptable. He was accepted, he's married, he's got a home there, he's got a good job, he's travelling. He's just a paedophile. And probably, yeah, I think Australia's right, he's probably one of the worst paedophiles they've ever had. Really, I think there's one close to what he was like, but I do, because I don't think we will ever know really how many victims there are of Boris. I don't think he's ever going to say. He admitted to the evidence that they'd found on him, right? He admitted only to what he had to admit. He didn't admit everything. He kept detailed notes, as we've heard before with many paedophiles that do this. They keep detailed notes of times and dates and names and stuff. You know, some have had a diary. We've had some make, you know, the paedophile manual, haven't we, of how to get away with it. Really, you know, these paedophiles, this was an intelligent man, but he weren't that bloody intelligent, was he, to keep folders and data with children's names that you've abused. You see, this is what gets me. These paedophiles think they're going to get away with it forever. They are not. You're going to get caught. If you are a paedophile doing this sort of stuff, you're going to get caught, and when you do, you're going to face justice. And I'm telling you now, for a paedophile to even get 28 years in a state prison in Australia, you'd be lucky to survive, right? Really, because you are the lowest of the low as the hierarchy in a prison goes. You know, this is such a serious crime here. You know, many prisoners across the world in many prisons cannot believe what they are reading and hearing about these cases. They can't believe it. Some are in there for life, some are there in there for other things. They've got nothing to lose, right? But a lot of them, or the majority of them, are not in there for crimes against children. And no matter what you think about many criminals that are in prisons at the moment, most of them still have morals when it comes to children. They really do. So, I mean, if there's anything we can say about this case, it's that these paedophiles like this should be worried, because you will be caught. Because these agencies out there, these task force are searching out there for people like them, aren't they? And sooner or later, they will be brought to justice. And they can sit there and cry, and they can sit there and say they've got a paedophilic disorder. I can't help myself. It's not my fault. It's in me. I'm ill. It won't save them, you know. It will never save them. Our only fault here, in any of these cases we do, has to be about pushing for harder sentences for these sort of criminals. Really. You know, making these cases aware, highlighting these cases. Do I think 28 years to this man is enough? No, I don't. To tell you the truth, they should have thrown the book at him. What else can a person do to another human being, a child at that? What would it take to put someone away for more than 28 years? What does it take? Really? There's a lot of people in prison that's done less than him. You know, when we talk about financial crime or white collar crime, all this sort of stuff, that are doing longer time than that. Money laundering could get you longer time than that. You know, we have to get a little bit serious here, and the public have to get a little bit, you know, angry at some of these cases as they come out. Yes, it's a good sentence, I suppose, but it's not great, is it? It's not great. But what it does do, I think, on the underground, you know, on the dark web, is make people worried. Because if this man was distributing out to other paedophiles, right, they will be caught as well. Because there's always a trail, isn't there? A digital trail, always. Always. They can decode, they can do everything they want to do, but they're being broken all the time. New technology now is really tracking lots of things. In the end, I'm not saying we're going to stop it, I'm not, but we need to make sure that we get the worst paedophiles like this off our streets as soon as possible, and show that we are determined to make sure that these people stay in prison for the rest of their life, because they're no good to society. There's no good. What can they do? They're a harm and a danger to our children. All of them. All of them. This man will never change. You know, this is probably, when I read this case, and there's other ones I've got coming up which are just as bad, but you know, when you look at this man, I think to myself, the images, the amount of images, the amount of filming that this man done, every one of them represents a child that is being sexually assaulted, in pain, you know, hurt, damaged the rest of their life. That's what, when I read 35,000 photographs, 4,800 videos, it comes to my mind, is these poor children. So do I wish this man well in prison? No. I think, you know, take your chances in life, don't you? Well, good luck with going into Australian prison with that on your record. Let's see how that one goes. We could be doing a follow-up on him shortly, one of these days, I think. But anyway, you know what to do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and thanks for watching. Till the next time. Bye-bye.